What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Event Marketing Redefined. I am your host, Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockaway Exhibits and Events, and today I have Kodi Morton on with me. She is the Senior Marketing Communication Specialist with Bruker Scientific. Kodi, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Kodi, we met at Exhibitor Live last year, and I think it is fitting and cool that we are now having a conversation. I believe it's a week or two before Exhibitor Live again. And the basis around our conversation is you are a graduate, correct, of
Yep,
the
yep,
CTSM program,
certified.
and you are certified. I feel certifiable
All
myself,
right.
but yeah, you are certified. And you are actually coming back to teach classes in the
Yes,
program. You found so much value in the training that you are coming back to
yes,
teach, and you have 3 classes this year. I
yes.
also have a class. So we have that in
Excellent.
common. We will both be there teaching. Your 3 classes are making your small booth mighty. You want to pay for what? Adding value to your sponsorships and reproducible small booths that can still stand out, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Those are those are your 3
Yes,
classes. So anybody listening to this, if you catch it before Exhibitor Live, sign up, get in Kodi's classes, okay?
absolutely.
So let's talk about this first. How has you going through the CTSM program and getting certified and learning all the cool learnings about being an event marketer, how has that helped you and now turned you to want to go in and teach yourself?
Well, I fancy myself an information enthusiast, so I'm one of those people that really enjoy hearing knowledgeable people share about their passion and about what they're knowledgeable in, the topics they're knowledgeable in. And I was really struck by how the people that were speaking were also doing the jobs that I was doing. And I thought, okay, these are not people that are necessarily trained speakers that all they do year round is speak. These are people that are rolling up their sleeves. They're down in the trenches. They arrive on site at an event and are missing a
Mhm.
power cord or have two wrong HDMI cables and have to navigate getting to someplace to replace something. So that was really great to have that constant updated knowledge. So when we were going through the COVID coming back and what is it going to look like, the people that were speaking were talking about their challenges. And I realized, you know what? I have some ideas about what we could do different or better or keep improving for small booths. And I felt like that was something that I didn't feel had a big representation, and perhaps that was something I could bring to the table.
I like those 2 bits there because I think essentially there is a really good community in a sense of event marketers. And when I mean there's a good community, I mean everybody feels a part of it when you start
Mhm.
talking about it. There's not actually like a huge community that everybody's a part of, but when you
Right.
talk to people doing the work and living the life, everyone speaks the same language and people really kind of gravitate to each other.
Yeah.
So, you coming back to teach and take on a topic that maybe is not talked about enough, that kind of leads me into my next question, which is essentially, how did you come up with your 3 classes? How did you come up with these topics? Because I think the idea of giving out tactics, strategies, and ideas for
Mhm.
executing small booths at a high level is a
Mhm.
great topic. And then I also think the idea of just talking about sponsorships, bringing
Mhm.
your own value to it and adding
Mhm.
value to it is another really good topic. So how did you come up with those and, develop
Well,
them?
one of the things I was noticing from the sessions that I was attending that I really enjoyed, but I was missing the piece of, was they were telling us as the audience how to do things on a grand scale. They were showing things they were doing with a $250,000 budget, or they were showing amazing things that they were doing. And I thought, I know that some of this is reproducible on a small scale. I
Mhm.
know that we can take some of that and scale it to my budget. I don't have a $250,000 budget per event. I don't even
Yeah.
have one event that's that big, but I know that there are parts. And that's what I started doing. I started making notes about what parts I could scale down. And I kept hoping that when they talked about these big events, they would also mention, now, if you're doing a smaller event, consider doing it this way to make it work. If you're doing a smaller footprint, consider doing it this way to make it work. And they would have ideas. If I raised my hand and asked, how would you do that on a different scale? They would have answers. And I thought, why aren't you telling me that to begin with? Why do I have to ask the question, you know? And so I thought, well, it's probably because, quite honestly, the exhibit houses, and you know this, are working on those large scales. There are very few exhibit houses that get called to do 10 by 10s. You know, they're doing 20 by 20s and larger. So the people like me that are doing 10 by 10s are buying a piece of graphic and reusing it, reusing it, reusing it, you know. And honestly, it's a lot of fun to hear about the big giant stuff. And it's more exciting. For instance, if you watch the Super Bowl, that's a lot more exciting to watch than if you're watching somebody's T-ball or Pee-wee football game. Unless it's your kid, you're not spending Saturday out at the field watching someone else's kid play Pee-wee football. So it's just
Yeah.
kind of that type of scaling it down.
No, I get that completely. And I think one of the reasons I like the topic is because I agree with you. I feel like in our industry, everybody shows off the big work,
Mhm.
everything, no knock on exhibitor, but like all the work they put in their magazine is, what's the budget? $1 million. Great.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to say it's hard to screw up $1 million budget on the trade show floor because I'm sure people could do it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think that's the minority.
Mhm.
The majority are people in 10 by 10, 10 by 20, and even 20 by 20s and 20 by 30s and 20 by 40s that don't get talked enough. Your run-of-the-mill average exhibitor on the floor,
Mhm.
they're not ADT, right? They're not the
Right.
big name that's
Yeah.
going to be able to move weight. So how do you take these strategies, these experiential ideas, like
Mhm.
theming and things, and how do
Yeah.
you give people strategies in a 10 by 10 to 20 by 20, whatever it may be, just your smaller average exhibitor? I think it's a great topic. So let's go into the first class I really want to talk about is your adding value to sponsorships, because I think it's a
Mhm.
really cool conversation. I've been an advocate for a long time. I look at a lot of the sponsorships that are available through
Mhm.
our clients and through even
Yep.
our own. And I feel like it's a lot of the same stuff. And then I
Yeah.
also feel like unfortunately, I think there's a lot of meaningless kind of junk in there
Mhm.
that they
Yeah.
try to get you to pay for. So I've
Mhm.
talked a lot about how I think sponsorship need to evolve and change to fit kind of, today's demand. So you mentioned kind of a 3-step method for evaluating sponsorships.
Mhm.
I think it's one thing for the associations and shows to offer the sponsorships. I
Mhm.
think it's then on exhibitors and people who are paying to sponsor to understand how to evaluate and fold it into their overall strategy. So give us a little bit about your 3-step method.
So, one of the things that you have to remember when you're talking sponsorships is that the way that I have talked to those exhibit companies, you know, you're going to a ABC Con and the planners have sponsorships and they have the basic sponsorship package. Every time you're in Atlanta, they always have these packages. You know, you can do this, that, and that. And they just kind of repeat it because it's easy for them to take what other people have done in the Atlanta, Georgia World Center and repeat it. So they just put it on repeat. But the 3 steps that I always encourage people to start with is what your goal is, what your budget is, and what your message is. You do that with everything. That's the way you're planning your booth, basically, too. So you need to decide what your goal is. And when you look at the goal, you need to also look at the audience. Because if you're trying to speak to everybody, then maybe some of those big giant banners at the Georgia World Center make sense for you. But it might not make sense if you're only looking for specific customers. If I'm at a lab, my company does analytical equipment. If I'm at a crime con, you know, when it's all the FBI and all of the different forensic people from around the country come and attend this fictional conference. And I only want to talk to the lab scientists that do dirt analysis. my goal is to find 20 dirt analyzing people. I don't
Yeah.
want to spend a ton of money on the big splashy billboards and such. So my budget for a 10 by 10 booth is not covering that anyway. So I need to figure out what my message is. My audience, I've decided I want it to be, just people that analyze dirt samples. So I start looking for sponsorships that are going to talk to those people. A lot of times that specific option doesn't exist. Oftentimes it ends up being a email blast or a postcard I can send out or something like that. But sometimes you can take what already exists and modify it to work for you to
You
get your
know,
message.
when you said three pieces of goal, budget, and message, right?
Mhm. Yep.
I think the budget is a super obvious one. You can afford what
Right.
you can afford, right? So you
Yeah.
got to look at the menu and know, okay, this is where
Yeah.
I'm at. But I really like the idea of looking at your message,
Hmm.
right? That you're saying that, because I think most times I tell people all the time when they're going to a trade show in general, one of my biggest things is asking them, what do you want your customers to walk away knowing?
Yeah.
And that really should lead back to your message.
Yeah.
That should build into your booth planning and everything. But I love that you're putting that in there with sponsorship, because if you have a message to a certain niche or broad audience, it
Yeah.
does help you dial in. How could I get this message to them?
Yeah.
Right? Like, is there a
Yeah.
creative way to do this through what's being offered? And
Yeah.
I think that's a really cool lens, you're looking through there.
And then I
Um,
can, Matt, look at what hall is maybe the dirt scientists and the forensic scientists that are using lab equipment, their sessions are all down a hallway.
yeah.
And so I don't want to do any messaging in the B and C hallway area because none of my scientists are going to be down there. I need to focus on where they're going to be.
Yeah. For anyone listening, like, it's being niche, it's being
Mhm.
specific, it's being
Mhm.
smart about, it's kind of like you use, it's a bad analogy if it's this, but it's like you don't really want a shotgun approach. You want like
Right.
a sniper approach, right? Like you got one
Yeah.
bullet, not 500 just to spray around, right? And I hate that that's the analogy. It makes sense whether you're, whatever.
Yeah. Well,
But
it's
I
like
think that that's how you have to think about it.
if you had a tray of cupcakes, but someone was gluten sensitive, you would make their cupcakes separate.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna make cupcakes for everybody because everybody's gonna visit the
Hmm.
booth, but I
Yeah.
know that my audience is gluten sensitive, so I'm
Yeah.
gonna special those
You,
cupcakes
yeah.
just for my audience, and then I'm gonna zhuzh it up. I'm gonna make it fancy
Yep.
for them. I'm gonna make sure they know, hey, I'm talking to you, gluten sensitive attendee, because I did these special for you. I got cupcakes for everybody, but I made
Yeah.
something special for you. So I might do a sponsorship that's branded, I might do a enhanced listing. Those are often affordable in my budget range. So I might do that because I want people to know we've never been to the crime people conference. So we want people to know that my company is at the crime conference. So I want to enhance the listing. And then once I have the messaging for my dirt analyzing people, then they can find me easily because I've got the messaging with the branding and I hook it back to the enhanced listening stuff.
Yeah, I like the idea of being more specific and targeted when you're
Hmm.
doing that. When I look at the description of the class, right, you
Hmm.
talk a little bit about not just buying sponsorships, but you talk about adding value to
Yeah.
sponsorships, right? What do you mean by adding value to the sponsorship?
I tell you what, Matt, it was an aha moment during COVID shutdown and everything was virtual. We all remember it. And I was chasing my own tail, trying to figure out ways to connect with people. And one of the sponsorships that they offered was put your logo here on this page. Everything was virtual. So it was all about images and clicks and everything. And so I sent my logo and then I refreshed my screen to see what people were doing, whose logo was already submitted, and I saw someone that had submitted not only their logo but a little call to action. Well, it wasn't a call to action, a little be sure that you ask about our ABC widget.
Yeah.
And I thought, why am I just sending them a logo? They just want a JPEG. They don't care if it's my logo in, 100% or if it's my logo and a call to action. So I started realizing that, especially on those things where the very minimum they want your logo, that's the first place you can start to add value. What is your messaging that you're going to have? Start considering adding that to your logo spot, because they don't care if it's your logo or if it's a JPEG of something else. They just want you to submit a JPEG.
How much adaptability do you think events are willing to allow in
It
terms of
depends what your budget
sponsorships?
will take.
Mm-hmm.
That's
But you
that's
can
when
ask,
you're,
right? I mean, you can ask,
yeah,
hey, can I do
yeah,
this? Like, I encourage our
absolutely.
clients all the time, like,
Yeah,
ask, can you
absolutely.
do this? I mean, why not?
And sometimes, Matt, they'd never even thought about it.
Hmm.
I'll say, well, can I do a standing sign? Oh, well, we've never thought about doing a standing sign. Well, I've already decided I need to be in hallway A for the dirt analyzing people.
Yeah.
So I need a standing sign in hallway A. And then I just have to mention, hey, can we do a standing sign or a stanchion at their water cooler or something? So I can reinforce that we're talking dirt in booth 123,
Yep.
and all you have to do is that asking thing. You have to be brave enough to ask. I know
Yeah.
people that are, if you're doing fight, flight, or freeze, I know people that would flight every time. I'm not
Yep.
asking. If it's not offered,
Yeah.
I'm not asking. Can I have an extra glass of water when I'm sitting down at the table? No, I am not asking. If they forget my water, I'm just going to not drink anything.
Yeah.
So they would not even dream of talking to the event planners about, could you offer something or would you consider offering something? Most times I get a yes, we haven't thought about it, or let me find out.
Yeah. I would encourage it. I mean, it makes me think of an idea, like a very common thing is to sponsor a lunch, right?
Yeah.
Where you can
Mhm.
sponsor a lunch. And to what we talked about earlier, if that lunch is specific to you, or you feel like your ICP, your client, your customer is in that lunch,
Yeah.
well, I would say, hey, we'll sponsor the lunch for X. Question: can I bring in a barista and do a coffee bar inside
Yes.
the lunch? Can I add, I'll
Yes.
pay for it. Can I
Yeah.
add to it? Because after lunch, a lot of people want coffee.
Yeah.
And then maybe you can have custom napkins or
Yes.
drink things that go around the
Yep.
coffee that
Yep.
have a message that go
Absolutely.
around it. So now you're
Yeah.
giving out your own custom coffee.
Yep.
It costs you more, but you're
Right.
bringing that value. Like, there's so many different things where
Yeah.
you just, I would encourage people, think outside the box,
Yeah.
because you
And
can
Matt,
ask,
a
never
lot of
hurts.
times when I'm at a small booth, the reason I have a small booth is not because my budget is small. It's just because the hall only has small booths.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's not
Oh, yeah.
it's not a big event. If I'm going to a specific crime lab meeting on the East Coast and it's only crime directors from Massachusetts, that's not a big group of people. So I've
Yep.
got a small area. So I might be able to get budget if I'm decided, what, there are 10 key crime labs in the Massachusetts area that we need to get in front of. Let me sponsor that lunch. Let me bring in that barista. And like you said, all you have to do is ask. And the great thing about sponsoring a lunch or something is you can get creative. If you don't have barista money, you can say, can I supply the cups? And then do branded reusable cups.
Yeah.
Or can I supply bottles of water and do branded bottles of water?
Yeah. I
Something to
mean,
get in front of that customer base.
say a part of your message is sustainability, right?
Hmm.
Like, could you bring in, you'd say sustainable or green
Hmm.
plates, napkins, cups? Say, hey,
Yep.
can I bring these in? Can we have a message on them about
Yes.
sustainability? Like, you constantly have to think and constantly have to ask.
And the exhibit companies, the people running, the organizations running these events don't usually mind if you're solely sponsoring something for you to supply
Yeah.
paperware and other things. Oftentimes they'll say, bring in a flyer and leave a flyer. Well,
Mhm.
instead of a flyer, could I do a flash drive that has, all of my products listed on it or all of my information? A lot of times I'll just leave postcards at the spot and say, come to our booth for the XYZ premium,
Yeah.
and then I've got a way to scan their badge and hand them the XYZ premium.
Tell me your thoughts. I talked about this earlier on sponsorships in general. I think they
Mhm.
need to evolve. I think when you look at a menu of sponsorships, many of them are just there to be there almost.
Mhm.
I know that a lot of shows, your average show, many sponsorships don't even sell, right?
Yep.
They're negotiable towards the
Yep.
last final hours.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on sponsorships and like if you were running a show, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
what might you offer? What might you put in
that is
there?
a challenging question, Matt. One thing that I would prefer that these groups drift to is kind of a la carte. These are the options, but let us know if you have an idea you don't see. And
Yeah.
especially with these small events that we go to, I'll ask about lanyards or things that I know they're going to have anyway, bags, things I know they're going to have anyway. And then I can use my vendor to get a better pricing, or I can place a bigger order. I can order it for XYZ conference and then order an extra 100 just plain logoed
Yeah.
for me to give away. Things like that I really like. I don't know that you'll ever get away from sponsorships because a lot of those you have first right of refusal. And so the big companies are going for the splashy banners. We always do the splashy banner. And I talk to planners, fellow event marketers that are like, I try to talk them out of the splashy banner every year, but the CEO loves seeing his name up there on the splashy banner. And he's
Um,
scared to death if he doesn't have his name on the splashy banner, our competitor is going to do the splashy banner. I get it, but I know how much it costs. And I think there's so much more
um,
you could do to directly connect with your customers.
yeah.
And I think it's a necessary evil.
Yeah. I think I would like to see the association start looking, or people running the shows at like some companies are getting really creative in and around the shows
Mhm.
with things like transportation and
Yeah.
experience around it in the city. And
Mhm.
they're doing it not having to go through the show, but essentially they're leveraging the show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I think it's
Yeah.
it's good and bad, but they're being creative and going outside the box to deliver
Yeah.
something to an attendee better. So I think shows should be paying attention to that
Yeah. I
and then
think,
be making that avenue for people to do that
yeah.
quicker, easier, better,
Yeah.
and
I
sell it.
think the associations that take the standpoint of you can only use our sponsorships and we will dock you or strike against you if you do
Mhm.
something outside of the association timeframe. If you do a lab something off-site, then you're going to get in trouble, essentially. I think that they're wrong-headed with doing
I
that. I
would
think
agree.
your approach makes a lot more sense to get ahead of that, to
Yeah, I
say,
wouldn't let
okay,
anybody know.
yeah, we
I'm not
we are
going to dock you.
offering, yeah, we are offering all sorts of things. And if there's something that you want to do off-site, let's connect and figure out how to make that happen. Then they have the wherewithal to be able to advertise it as an value added to their event
Yeah, I mean, I
as
wouldn't
the
be docking
association.
people for getting creative, right? I mean,
You see it
everyone's there for the
happen
same
though.
thing.
Yeah,
Oh, I know. I
yeah,
mean, everyone's there for the same thing. And then
yeah,
I would be
absolutely.
taking cues from
Yeah,
what is going on? What are people
yeah,
investing in? How are people getting creative? I see companies, a good example, renting a house
yeah,
and throwing a wellness event
sure.
outside
Yeah,
of the thing for 2 3 days,
yeah,
like just so many different things
yeah,
that the shows I think could start to pick up on and offer rather than the
yeah.
the basics, like just to get a little bit more creative, I think.
Yeah, and our industries are business to business. And so the one of the competing events that's always happening that you always have to be wary of is that their companies are renting out a hotel conference area to bring in lab equipment and set up a pop-up lab, essentially. Whereas
Yeah.
if you could make that a sponsorship and put it in the facility, I would much rather be in the facility than to have to negotiate with the hotel down the street
Yep.
for space to ship my lab equipment to, than to get people back and forth. So, but it's one of those things where the associations either have to admit that it's going on and embrace it, or just plug their ears and ignore it, I guess.
Let's get to the designing small booths with big
Yeah.
impact and kind of
Yeah.
utilizing your smaller space better.
Hmm.
I love that you're talking about this. I think it's important because I think not everybody has a big exhibit space. I think there are, you mentioned earlier about being smaller shows, smaller
Hmm.
exhibit halls. Big shows don't always mean big results, right? I mean, I know a
Right.
lot of companies going
Yeah.
to small niche shows and they
Yeah.
crush it, right? Because it's all about who is there and why are they
Yeah.
there. So talk to me a little bit
Yeah.
about the class that you're teaching, right? Well, you have two of them that
Yeah.
are in line
Yeah.
on the,
So
yeah, so give me a little bit on
the
those.
one is a small but mighty, is a panel discussion, and we've got some guest panelists that are going to be talking about from their end of things what they're doing to stand out and to reinforce their messaging in their small booth. And then the session that I'm doing is an advanced learning session, and we're actually going to look at your calendar. Let's just dial it in to you specifically. Look at your calendar. What do things on your calendar have in common? A lot of times we try to, as a small booth exhibitor, it turns into send a roll up banner, send a roll up banner, send a tablecloth. Well, if you have the similar messaging for 5 events, that means you could pool all of that graphic money together for those 5 events and create one great, maybe a backlit graphic that could
Mhm.
be reused 5 times instead of 5 roll-up banners. So a lot of small booth making a big impact is thinking about what is reproducible. If I'm going to give away popcorn poppers, little microwave popcorn poppers at my shows, at one show, then I can look at what other shows I have in the food industry, and I could put all of that budget together and buy a better premium to give out at each of those food shows. So that's one of the things. And it's just basically looking at your audience and looking at your messaging again and how you can make that stand out. And the one thing is, I remind people that when you look at it on your calendar, it looks like you're just repeating, repeating, repeating. But when you look at it in scope of the attendees, they're only seeing that once. The people that go to the popcorn
Mhm.
show in January are not the people going to the cheese show in July. But I can use the same booth setup and the same collateral at both shows and get double duty and make a bigger impact because I've then taken two budgets and created a bigger message.
Where did kind of the genesis of this presentation come from? Where essentially like what made you think about smaller booths and, kind of creating them small but mighty and
Yeah,
reproducing
kind
content? How did
of
that work for you?
out of necessity because I have mostly small shows and mostly small booths, but I really like the big impact idea. I'm sitting in the sessions at Exhibitor Live and people have $500,000, $250,000, and they're making these big splashy things. But I had heard once that even a small event can have a wow. So
Oh yeah.
what's your wow for your booth? And then I started thinking about it. I had been letting the roll up tablecloth mantra rule my life. And then I grabbed it and said, wait a minute, I don't like roll ups and tablecloths, especially for all of my shows. If I'm going to have to do 20 shows, that's boring. I want a wow. It's hard to wow with a roll up and a tablecloth. So what's my wow going to
Yeah.
be? And I really looked at editing what I was doing to conserve budget and resources to start making that wow. And I
Interesting.
have an English degree. And so back in the day when I was getting my degree, we had to take a poetry class. And one of the things you learn in poetry is every word that is used in a poem is essential. And when you're looking at a poem, if you're writing a poem, you want every word to be essential. And I started looking at my booth and editing out the unessential. Did I need to have a brochure binder that had every brochure in it, just in case one person stopped by. It was adding to the space on the table. It was adding to my shipping, like, why am I doing this? And I started looking at those elements that I had been handed, as the last person did it like this, so do it like this type of thing. And I started deciding what really needed to be there.
What kind of advice would you give to somebody starting out, running their trade shows for a company, and they have smaller spaces, they have 10 by 10s, they have 10 by 20s? What kind of mindset would you tell them to have? What kind of process, what kind of tips would you give them?
I think the first thing I would ask is find out from your internal stakeholders what the goals are for the trade show events for the year. Overall, overarching, what are you expecting to gain from doing the trade shows? And if they're saying, well, we just want leads, I'm going to approach it a lot differently than if they say, we want to educate the populace about our new analyzer. I'm going to approach it a lot differently, because if you want leads and you don't qualify to me what leads are, or I only go to shows where I want everybody, it's a publication type of situation where I'm a publisher and I want everybody that attends, I'm just going to give out cute tchotchke that everybody has to stop by the booth and pick up. So I'm going to look for whatever the cute tchotchke is for the year, and then I'm just going to scan badges. But if you say you want to come off as a leader in the industry and introduce this new widget, I'm going to set it up different from start to finish. I'm going to set up the whole booth differently, because now we're talking about education. Now we're talking about getting information to the people, not tchotchke to the people. And now you're saying that the education is more important than the leads. So I'm going to approach messaging different, because I'm going to approach the call to action and the follow-up differently. And I think that's the big thing, is clarify with your internal stakeholders what their goal is for the event program.
Hard to work through something when you don't understand where it's going, right?
Yeah.
Or where somebody wants it to go.
And if they come back with, well, we've always had an event program, so we just need to continue, because if we're not at the show, then our competitor is going to be there. I'm going to approach that differently too. Okay, that's fine.
But at least
I think it would be fun to do, a gamification. So we're just going to, if you don't care, I'm doing gamification because that's fun to me. I'm going to make it, I'm going to put my spin on it, whatever the goal is. And I think that's something that I've really enjoyed. You have to have the right manager for that, though. I have worked for some managers that have not enjoyed that as much. In Kodi having fun with the idea. And I've had some managers that have trusted me with the idea because they didn't see the vision, and I knew it was all on me to pull it off. If I can't pull it off, it is going to be a failure. And I did pull it off, and they were really impressed that connected with the audience.
Let's jump on. Let's talk a little bit about booth spend versus sponsorship spend. Give me your thoughts. How do you think about that?
That is like, if I had the perfect percentage dialed in and could give that to you, Matt, I would probably be able to retire on the awesomeness of that information. And I would write a book and just reap the millions for people wanting that information. I think it's really depends on what your program is. By that, I mean, what your message is, what the expectation is, what the goal is, if they just want leads, if they want the education. However, the standard that I've always learned at Exhibitor Live is if you take the cost of the booth and multiply that by, I'm going to say it wrong, 70% more, so that 30% of your booth and the rest, that's how you come up with your budget. I think I'm saying that right. That should be what your cost is for your show. So if I take $100 and multiply it by 3, so $300 is the cost of the show then. Just because I'm not a math person, I'm an English person. We're just using very small numbers.
Yeah.
$300. However, if you want to do sponsorship, multiply it by 4. So then you're not $300, you're $400.
Hmm.
So you take in your booth space cost. So if you're doing a 10-foot booth, if you're doing a 400-foot booth, whatever your booth cost is, multiply that by 4. And that should allow you enough to do the sponsorship of some sort.
You ever use the booth or use sponsorship to kind of leverage each other?
Yes, there have been times when I have actually worked with, I think I understand your question. There are times when I have worked with these small shows, you have the benefit of working with them every year and you know them and you're like, hey, Ruth, we're going to be at the show. But I don't know if I'm going to have a very big booth this year, but I'll do some sponsorship. And she comes back and she says, she's a association president, and she says, you know what, we'd love for your company to have a larger presence because we're really working on building out the space on the trade show floor. We're trying to make it take up a bigger space. And I said, fine, I will sponsor you and then you give me the booth space. I can't
Hmm.
count it as extra booth space I'm paying for, but I can count it as sponsorship. So we've done that before where we've worked with the association to have a bigger presence than we had intended, just because they wanted to have an island booth and I was only going to have an inline. It's just like, if you could just make it big enough to have an island booth, we'll do the sponsorship. You'll get the extra information and that comes with the extra sponsorships and the extra visibility that comes with the larger booth. Perhaps
Very
that didn't
nice.
answer your question, but
No,
that was what I
no,
thought
it
of.
did. Yeah, no, I mean, I think everything's negotiable, right? And
Mhm.
then I think the other avenue I was thinking of that is essentially how do you utilize your sponsorship to draw people to the booth and utilize the
Mhm.
booth to draw people to the sponsorship, right? Like each
Oh,
way in
sure.
kind of like a
Yeah.
guerrilla marketing style
Yep.
mechanisms, from one to the other.
Yeah. Yeah. So it goes back to that JPEG of the logo. I've done sponsorships where I've sponsored a charging station and
Hmm.
they all they wanted was a JPEG. I said, "Can I put something about the booth on there?" And she's like, "I have this much space to work with and I don't really have a person that can put together a graphic for us, so I really just need a JPEG." And I said, "How
Yeah.
about this? I use my graphic people and we put it together and I give you a JPEG for the whole space instead of just the logo space." And she said, "Oh, that would be great." She said, "Here's what I need it to say. Anything else you add is totally fine." So I
Yeah.
was able to add a call to action with coming to our booth and a QR code call to action on the same charging station
Mm.
sign. And so that really raised our visibility. And
Nice.
the sponsorships that we do a lot of times are those two-dimensional signs, and we'll sponsor like the evening reception and things like that. But I try to only do stuff that's on the show floor
Mhm.
because if I've spent that much money to be on the show floor and I've got scientific equipment, I want people to come see my scientific equipment. I got it there. It's been calibrated. It's set up. It's ready to run. That's where my scientists are. So I try to do stuff that's on the showroom floor.
What would you say are some of your biggest deciding factors on paying for a sponsorship, right? When someone's like, hey, this lunch is 12 grand and it gets
Hmm.
you A, B, and C. Like
Yeah.
when it comes down to the brass tacks of making a decision on, I'm going to pay X to do this, what's going through your mind? How are you making that decision?
It really goes back to that, what are my goals and what is my message? Because if they've got, it's usually $24,000 and this year we're doing it for 12,000 because I really need someone to do it the first time. And we had that sort of opportunity a couple of years ago at a large scientific event. And it was
Mhm.
one where my message was, our company is here, our competitor is not. So I wanted everybody that could see that our company was there but our competitor was not.
Yeah.
So I spent the extra money to be on everybody's badge and to
Mm.
support because that aligned with the messaging. But I've had to turn down some really good deals. They're like, Kodi, it's a third of what it usually costs. I'm like, ugh, I could totally afford it, but it doesn't hit my messaging.
Yeah.
or a lot of times we'll put a golf green, a putting green in your booth. I'm like, I have a 10 by 10. I'm not giving up any of my real estate for a putting green, even if
Mhm.
it's so cheap. It doesn't align with my messaging because my messaging has to be the scientific equipment, not having fun with a putting green.
Let's close up. Let's talk about CTSM and the
Yeah.
program and kind of the education that you got and the certificate. What would you say was like the best class or most impactful for you over the years? Maybe it's a topic you learned about, not a specific class, but like
Mhm.
what's something that you learned that you think really helped accelerate your career?
There was one class, I remember it was Felicia. Oh, I'm not going to remember her last name off the top of my head. She's from J&J and she still teaches it, I bet.
Does
But
she still?
yeah, and she's an excellent speaker anyway, and she is a fireball. And if you can sit at her feet and just learn from her, she's one of those people where you're like, everything you say is so smart. And one of the
Yeah.
things that she encouraged was helping you stay within budget. She has an order change form that when she's doing a big event, she has if something changes, she has a manager that has a cost center number, fill out the order change form. So if they're like at doing a reception, and I'm going to remember this incorrectly. So if she ever hears this, know that this is not exactly what she said, but this is my takeaway. If you're at a reception and the wine is flowing and the VIP manager comes up to you and says, we need another case of wine open, but it's not on your budget and it wasn't on the original banquet order. She says, okay, but it's going to cost you. And he's like, it's fine. We're having a great time and I'm schmoozing over here. And she said, that's fine. I need your cost center number here and your signature that this is going to be charged back to you. And her giving that permission to ask for those right away was an aha moment because we've all been at the trade show floor and the manager who is in on the original planning, who is in on the layouts, who is in on the thing comes in and is like, oh, we need to have 4 more of those, whatever those
Hmm.
are,
Yeah. Yeah.
run to Home Depot and get more of those, or run to the AV group and get a bigger monitor. I didn't have budget for a bigger monitor. Remember, we had decided
Hmm.
this monitor was big enough, but they get to the show floor and that's not big enough. Then you say, okay, manager, I'm going to charge this back X amount of dollars to your cost center. Is that okay? And that was great because that makes the manager stop and think, oh, the bottom line. Yeah, I
Yeah.
forgot I need to think about that.
It's how important budget is.
Yeah.
It's just such an important item in managing the budget, the expectations of the budget, the
Yep.
delivery of it. That's
Yep.
good. What say you were sitting in front of 100 young event marketers, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
New, working at companies. What would you tell them? What would be like your plea to them to go and take the CTSM classes or to get into a program to learn and gain that knowledge? Yeah, I don't
You
want to
know,
sound like we're promoting it, but
yeah,
I just think that education in the event
yeah,
marketing space, it's
yeah,
part of the reason we do this podcast is I want people to
yeah,
gather the ideas, gather the knowledge, the strategy,
yeah.
the tactics. I think the classes do that well.
One of the things that CTSM does right, and they do a lot of things right, is they are the certification comes through a university. So there's a certain standard and a certain level of standard that has to be reached to get to that certification level.
Mm-hmm.
Between the testing and the portfolio and the required classes and the final exam, all feels like it comes through a university setting. It doesn't feel like I'm sitting through a PowerPoint that somebody made because that was part of their KPI. Oh, here's the
Mm-hmm.
PowerPoint. It's actually something that you're going to refer to over and over again. When you asked me what was my favorite or what I learned most, if you asked me that later, I would come up with a whole different answer because there are so many times, Matt, that I pull that knowledge of what I have learned over the years from all of those speakers and then from the connections I've made the great thing about attending CTSM courses at Exhibitor Live is you're meeting other professionals that turn out to be professionals in the same industries. So
Mhm.
I will go to a scientific show and I'll see somebody. I'm like, oh my gosh, you work for XYZ company. It is great to see you. Let's go and have a coffee before the show opens. Or even better, and I've done this both give and take. Do you have an extra power cord? I totally do not have a AAA battery. Do you have a AAA battery? And,
Mhm.
it's the knowledge that's going back and forth. It's the support that's going back and forth. It's the literal resources going back and forth. And the great thing about the CTSM program is it doesn't cost anything extra to add that certification plan to your attendee. So if you're already attending Exhibitor Live, be sure that you click on, yes, sign me up for the CTSM program. And there are so many times that I talked to new attendees at Exhibitor Live that had no idea that they could sign up for the CTSM program with no extra money out of pocket. Because if you've got your company is
Mhm.
paying for you to attend, best case scenario, you can add on this certification that helps you personally. It's value added. It makes a
That's
lot of
great.
sense.
Well, Kodi, I want to wish you the best of luck teaching your classes at Exhibitor Live.
Thank you.
I will see you there myself, and anybody
Absolutely.
who's listening, who's going, hopefully you take my class, you take Cody's classes,
Yep.
and we see you there as well. So Kodi, thanks for being on the show. Greatly
Yeah. Thank
appreciate
you.
it. It was a lot of fun talking to you. I appreciate the
Thanks,
time.
Matt. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.